Hi, my name is Megan,
My name is Ruthie.
And I'm Savannah.
and we are all 10th graders, a part of the Climate Changers Club. And over the next few months, we're going to be introducing an advisory-based curriculum around climate change. So within that, we're going to be focusing on environmental racism, Indigenous history, present, and injustices, and the science behind climate change, and further climate action. So moving forward throughout the next few weeks, we'll be having interactive activities, several exciting speakers from Minnesota, and other engaging activities.
So throughout the slideshow, we're going to be talking about environmental racism and Indigenous injustices. So that's going to be exploring the impact of climate change has on Indigenous peoples and its contribution to environmental racism.
So a good place to start is, what is environmental racism? And environmental racism, as defined by your dictionary, is the placement of low-income or minority communities in the proximity of environmentally hazardous or degraded environments, such as toxic waste, pollution, and urban decay. So this means a systemic placement of factories, manufacturing plants, and landfills in areas where the land value is cheaper. And this usually occurs in low-income and minority communities. This means that the people living in those areas have to deal with the health and safety effects of toxic and polluted land. So here you can see two instances of this, right? And these are both graphs from Minnesota, right? So these are local things that are happening right here. So you can see in the first graph on the left, your likelihood of living near a facility that emits pollution is insanely disproportionately higher if you live in a community of color or a low-income community. And you can see this mirrored over here with air quality risk, right? So the statewide average, 32% of people are above the risk guidelines, right, for air quality. In communities of color and Indigenous communities, 91%, so that's an overwhelming majority of people, are above the risk guidelines, right? So in almost the entire population is living in areas where air quality is deemed very unsafe. And so we see this right in our own neighborhoods in the Hennepin Energy Recovery Center, or HERC. If you live in Minneapolis, chances are your trash goes to HERC. It is this huge incinerator located in the North Loop, Minneapolis, right? And it burns about 1,000 tons of trash a day, which is insane. It's a lot. And it's marketed as a renewable energy source. And why wouldn't it be? You know, it takes your trash doesn't go to the landfills, it's burned for energy. But the issue is HERC produces a lot of very hazardous pollutants. One of those being dioxin, right? And so dioxin it causes cancer, it causes asthma, it causes all sorts of really bad things. And 51% of dioxin produced in the entire state of Minnesota is produced right there in Minneapolis from the HERC incinerator. And so if you are living in the areas around the HERC incinerator, mostly like North Minneapolis, you are exposed to a lot more of that dioxin, and you might have increased risk of asthma or cancers. And so when we look at this map, right, you can see that the darker areas are minority communities, and that a lot of those minority communities are located around HERC. And so this is a really great example of how environmental racism can be spotted right in our own communities and neighborhoods.
Alrighty, so to move on here to Indigenous people in the climate crisis and their historic environmental role. So Indigenous peoples were the first original environmentalists with a heightened understanding of the climate and nature's interrelationships. An important part of their culture is unity and coexistence with nature and animals, and that's always been reflected very clearly in their communities. So an important quote here is, Indigenous knowledge is based off on a millennia-long study of the complex relationships that exist among all systems within creation. So Sherry Mitzel, an Indigenous author from the Fennoscot Nation, writes, they're the first to understand the feedback loops and cycles that govern nature. Indigenous knowledge simply recognizes that familiar relationship and acknowledges that all life is both sovereign and independent. She says in her essay titled Indigenous Prophecy in Mother Earth. An article by Indigenous Climate Hub talks more about their understanding of climate change. Many Indigenous people are expressing concern over the changing environment. Many of the traditional way of life and traditional activities are threatened. Much of the knowledge held by the communities is environmentally based, so methods of predicting weather and environmental conditions are being threatened. The surrounding environment is changing so rapidly that the evolution of Indigenous tradition knowledge systems cannot keep up. So traditional knowledge observations on change in distribution, abundance, and diversity of biological species help to shed light on the real concerns of climate change for Indigenous peoples.
Okay, so an article by United Nations titled Department of Economic and Social Affairs talks about how Indigenous people are specifically affected by climate change. Indigenous peoples are among the first to face the direct consequences of climate change due to their dependence upon and close relationship with the environment and its resources. So climate change worsens the difficulties already faced by Indigenous communities, including political and economic marginalization, loss of land and resources, human rights violations, discrimination, and unemployment.
And so one of those big issues in Indigenous communities right here in Minnesota is Line 3. You've probably heard about Line 3 either from the pesky YouTube ads or the protests in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so from the website Stop Line 3, here's a quote explaining one of the most predominant problems surrounding Indigenous tribes in Minnesota. Line 3 is a proposed pipeline expansion to bring nearly 1 million barrels of tar sands per day from Alberta, Canada to Superior, Wisconsin. It was proposed in 2014 by Enbridge, a Canadian company. Enbridge seeks to build a new pipeline corridor through untouched wetlands in the treaty territory of the Anishinaabe peoples through the Mississippi River headwaters to the shores of Lake Superior.
Alrighty, so we're going to watch a little video here, but before we do, there is a little graphic towards the bottom left, which you can look more about what Line 3 is and for more factual information at our Instagram there. I'm going to quick pull up the video.
Our Instagram is at UMA Climate Change News, by the way.
Okay. Let me pull up the video. There we go. Alrighty. So this is a perfect short
A lot of people
video.
want to know, and a lot of people don't know. So think of it this way. There are 6 really old pipelines that they put through in northern Minnesota, shipping diluted tar sands from Alberta to Superior, Wisconsin. And one of those lines is called Line 3. It has, according to Enbridge, about 900 structural anomalies in it. Structural anomalies are things like small little pinhole leaks, maybe it comes some cracks, and some of those end up to be big problems, like that Kalamazoo spill. That was a structural anomaly. Line 3, it's old and it's corroding and it's at the end of its life. It's already had a number of leaks and spills, and frankly, it's a catastrophe waiting to happen. There is a likelihood that there is a whole bunch of contamination under the present line. And once that corrodes, our children and grandchildren may one day watch it drain a lake or a wetland or flood a farm field. Fixing these problems is very expensive, so Enbridge wants to abandon the pipeline, walk away, and build a brand new one in a brand new corridor. Enbridge calls this a replacement project. They're replacing Line 3. They are not replacing Line 3. They're putting in a whole new corridor and doubling the size of the line. That's not a replacement. That's a brand new line. And that's what's wrong. So we've got 2 problems. First, we've got a problem of the proposed new Sandpiper and Line 3 corridor through the heart of our best lakes and wild rice watersheds and through our treaty territories. We also have the problem of this old crumbling line that Enbridge wants to abandon. And right now, what abandonment means is that they just leave it and walk away. And the company says that they will take care of it, but it is not clear that there is any liability from the Enbridge Corporation. The worst part is that neither the United States government or the state of Minnesota has any plan to deal with it. The good news is that the Ojibwe tribes are standing up, and a lot of landowners, county commissioners, and mayors are getting increasingly concerned about who's going to be liable for Enbridge's mess. So tell Governor Dayton to tell the state legislator, to tell county commissioners that abandonment is not what we want. We want big Canadian energy corporations to clean up their mess and not leave it for all of us. And we feel that they should put hardworking Minnesotans to work doing it. It's time to make a plan, investing in cleaning up and stabilizing our existing infrastructure and building stuff that actually serves people. Miigwech, this is Winona Leduc.
All right, that's a great video to learn more about this. I'll get us back to our slides here.
And if you're interested in getting involved, you can go to honortheearth.org or stopline3.org for more resources. And so we can see this map over here, which explains a little bit more about where Line 3 is. And then we can also see the proposed new Line 3, which goes, it looks like it goes right through the White Earth a reservation and those treaty lands would also go to Superior, Wisconsin. And so you can see all of the little waterways and all the little lakes in there. If any of those pipelines spilled, it would be devastating to virtually all of our waterways. You know, everything is connected. We've talked about that a little bit before, and that's a huge part of the Indigenous people's beliefs. And so if one thing gets contaminated, that can spread really, really quickly.
So thank you for listening. Next week, we will be talking with the speaker more on these topics, and you'll have time to talk with your advisor. And if you have any questions, but some questions to just think about after watching and listening in on this is, what is something that you learned? What is something that maybe surprised you, or what questions do you have about these themes that we talked about? Maybe what are some of your concerns about climate change and its impact on your culture and community, or what is something that you want to learn more about? Thank you so much.
Yeah, that
Thank
comes to the end
you.
of our slides. We'll see you next week. Thank
See you
you.
next week.